Dr. Jonathan was woken up by a nurse 5 minutes before the helicopter was expected to land. It was just before 1:30 in the morning. "What?" he said, confused. "Rescue service helicopter coming in. 2 patients, an injured man and a younger woman. The woman has gunshot wounds." "All right," Jonathan said wearily. Although he had only slept for half an hour, he felt groggy. He was on the night shift in the ER at Shklogenska Hospital in Göteborg. It had been a strenuous evening. By 1:30, the steady flow of emergency cases had eased off. He had made a round to check on the state of his patients, then gone back to the staff bedroom to try to rest for a while. He was on duty till 6 and seldom had the chance to sleep even if no emergency patients came in. But this time, he had fallen asleep almost as soon as he turned the lights out. Jonathan saw the lightning out over the sea. He knew that the helicopter was coming in the nick of time. All of a sudden, a heavy downpour lashed out the window. The storm had moved over Göteborg. He heard the sound of the chopper and watched as it banged through the storm squalls down towards the helipad. For a second he held his breath when the pilot seemed to have difficulty controlling the aircraft. Then it vanished from his field of vision, and he heard the engine slowly start to land. He took a hasty swallow of his tea and set down the cup. Jonathan met the emergency team in the admission area. The other doctor on duty took the first patient who was wheeled in, an elderly man with his head bandaged, apparently with a serious injury to the face. Jonathan was left with the second patient, the woman who had been shot. He did a quick visual examination. It looked like she was a teenager, very dirty, bloody, and severely wounded. He lifted the blanket that the rescue service had wrapped around her body and saw the wounds to her hip and shoulder were bandaged with duct tape, which he considered a pretty clever idea. The tape kept the bacteria out and the blood in. One bullet had entered her hip and gone straight through the muscle tissue. He gently raised her shoulder and located the entry wound in her back. There was no exit wound. The wound was still inside her shoulder. He hoped it had not penetrated her lung, and since he didn't see any blood in the woman's mouth, he concluded it probably had not. "Radiology," he told the nurse in attendance. That was all he needed to say. Then he cut the bandage that the emergency team had wrapped around her skull. He was frozen. He saw another entry wound. The woman had been shot in the head. There was no exit wound either. Jonathan paused for a second, looking down at the girl. He felt dejected. He often described his job as being that of a goalkeeper. Every day people come into his place of work in varying conditions, but with one objective: to get help. Jonathan was the goalkeeper who stood between the patients and the funeral home service. His job was to decide what to do. If he made the wrong decision, the patient might die or perhaps wake up disabled for life. Most often he made the right decision because the vast majority of injured people had an obvious and specific problem. A stab wound to the lung or a crushing injury after a car crash were both particular and recognizable problems that could be dealt with. But the survival of the patient depended on the extent of the damages and on Jonathan's skill. There were 2 kinds of injuries he hated. One was a serious burn case, because no matter what measures he took, the burns would almost inevitably result in a lifetime of suffering. The second was an injury to the brain. The girl on the gurney could live with a piece of lead in her hip and a piece of lead in her shoulder, but a piece of lead in her brain was trauma of a wholly different magnitude. He was suddenly aware of the nurse saying something. "Sorry, I wasn't listening." "It's her." "What do you mean?" "It's Elizabeth Salander, the girl that they had been hunting for the past few weeks, for the triple murder in Stockholm." Jonathan looked again at the unconscious patient's face. He and the whole of Sweden had seen Salander's passport photograph on billboards outside of newspaper crosskeys for weeks, and now the murderer herself had been shot. But that was not his concern. His job was to save a patient's life. irrespective of whether she was a triple murderer or a Nobel Prize winner, or both.